Hi, Misha here, and as I kind of work my way backwards, I already put up a video on the Eurofighter Typhoon again, and did one on the Tornado, both the IDS and ADV versions. So I thought I would revisit the SEPECAT Jaguar, and this you saw in the first video. This is the T.4 two-seat version. Has drop tanks on it. And here's a new one for you. This is the GR.3. This is the ground attack and reconnaissance version. Single-seater. And both of these models are from Corgi. I mean, they're British, so pretty good chance that that's the case. And they're both 172 scale diecast, because that's my favorite scale. Actually, lets me get more than 2 on a shelf, unlike 148. So I thought I'd just talk about it again and show off this new model here. Well, not new, but, you know, new to you. It's actually a limited production one they did. It's kind of in the winter camo. Kind of neat. I wish it had ordnance, but I also do kind of like the clean look because the plane itself is really kind of slim and trim. This all dates back to the early mid-60s. Britain was needing a new advanced trainer, and France was needing a basic trainer with light attack capability, kind of a secondary role. And to this end, the British company BAC signed an agreement with Breguet of France in 1965, and development would commence. 1966, the whole SEPECAT institution was set up to kind of proceed with the project. But very quickly, problems arose. I mean, as happens almost always with French Anglo collaborations. Pretty soon, Britain decided they needed theirs to be supersonic, and they were looking more for a ground attack capability. Long story short, even though, you know, the two companies are still collaborating, the designs are getting very different for France and the UK. But nevertheless, work went ahead. 1968, in September, the first prototype would fly. Testing would commence, of course, arguing, yada yada, you get the idea. But by 1970, a lot of things were changing. As I've said in other videos, the F-111K had been canceled. And prior to this, the Jaguar was kind of Britain's backup as a ground attack or strike fighter. Well, the backup became the primary because at this point, 1968, 1970, the Tornado wasn't really in existence yet, and yeah, Britain's existing options were aging quite a bit. So it became more important to them. Then in 1971, Dassault took over Breguet, and basically Dassault just said, hey, why don't you just buy our Mirage? They've got this new fancy F1, how about this? Or what about the Mirage 3 or 5? That didn't work. Yeah. It's worth pointing out that the whole Jaguar design is more French than English. They developed the engines, the main fuselage, Britain really, or I should say BAC, really contributed more of the wing structure, bit of the tail, the kind of whole rotating tail system. But, you know, it was more than a little bit French. Nevertheless, the first production model flew, and both countries ended up going for a mix of single-seaters to be used as attack planes and two-seaters to be used as trainers, both by 200. France would go with 160 single-seat and 40 two-seat, and Britain would go with 165 two-seat and, one-seat and 35 two-seat. So very similar numbers. The Jaguar would enter into French service in 1973 and would enter into the RAF a short time later in 1974. And the orders would be fulfilled through the 70s, and the last ones would be turned out of the factory in 1981. It's worth pointing out, just as with the Eurofighter and the Tornado, there was a work-share agreement where basically the planes were assembled both in France and the UK, but each factory would specialize in making one component. So they didn't have duplicates. So it was a true joint venture. So yeah, the last ones would be built. All in all, 540 Jaguars would come off the production line. In the UK, it was entered into service as the GR.1, with the training version being the T.2, trainer being a two-seater, of course. And it was, at this point, Britain's primary kind of strike or light attack craft, and a pretty neat little plane, if I do say so. The single-seat version here is about 55 feet long, and it has a wingspan of just 28 feet, which is actually the same as the Tornado with its wings fully swept back, so it's a very narrow wing. The two-seat version is a little bit longer at about 57.5 feet, but it has the same 28-foot wingspan. It's worth pointing out that the French version used the original engine called the Mark 101. The Brit version, which came into service a short time later, used the Mark 102, which had improved afterburners, just a little bit better, so it gave a little bit better thrust. It was a reasonably fast plane. It could get up to about Mach 1.6 at altitude, or even it could go supersonic at sea level, at a maximum altitude of about 46,000 feet. And it was armed with two 30mm cannon, each with 150 rounds, although the two-seater would not always have that. In fact, I think it either had one or sometimes no cannons. But the single-seater, the attack version, did. It could carry about 10,000 pounds in payload. It has two pylons under each wing, so a total of 4, plus a center line. More interestingly, it also has pylons on top of the wings for attaching air defense missiles. Pretty neat. The French versions didn't have these, but obviously the UK does. So, the idea is you could carry a couple of sidewinders up here and then have some iron bombs or rocket pods or what have you on the wings, and then even have room for a fuel tank in the center line. Again, if it's a small plane, 10,000 pounds is still more than a World War II B-17. Not bad. The plane was designed to take off from relatively short runways and also be able to kind of dive in quick and go for the dash to strike targets. Also to dash behind enemy lines. And it was even able to carry a nuclear weapon. That was one of the British requirements. One thing to point out, initially the French wanted this to be capable of operating off a naval carrier. This was a sticking point and delayed things, but finally they kind of gave that up around 1973, so that kind of sped things forward. France would deploy theirs in various hotspots in Africa during the 70s, and they would send them in 1991 to the Gulf to support Allied operations, and then they would retire their Jaguars in 2005. So a good career in France. In the UK, which is what this video is about, these would go into squadron service, and would replace some older things like the Hunter. They would see a few different updates. For example, they would go to the GR.3. They would also update the engine in 1981 to the Mark 104. They really wouldn't be doing a whole lot combat-wise. In fact, some squadrons would be replaced by the Tornado starting around 1986, give or take. But they would be deployed in 1990, 1991 in the Gulf. 12 would be sent over. They would operate alongside the Tornado. It's worth pointing out that no Jaguars were shot down, and they did fly a lot of missions. They weren't as technically advanced, and they weren't as capable, versatile as the Tornado. But, on the other hand, they had a better availability rating. They were considered more reliable and durable because, older tech. Those two planes were complemented by the old Blackburn Buccaneer, who operated as a laser designator during that war, but the Buccaneer was at the end of its service life. So in 1994, some of these were updated to GR.1Bs, which basically gave them a laser designating pod, and then these were deployed over Bosnia along with the Harrier to do the first bombing mission on European soil, at least the first bombing mission the RAF had conducted on European soil since World War II, right at 50 years before. So kind of an interesting historical note. They proved very effective with the laser designator pod, and a good way to extend the service life of a plane that wasn't dated but getting there. So the following year they decided to update the entire Jaguar fleet to a new standard. This would result in the GR.3 here and the T.4 trainer you see over here. Not to get into it all, but they would do things like updating the avionics, electronics, more compatibility with various reconnaissance pods, and modern ECM, modern terrain mapping, GPS started to be integrated. Then in 1997, the second stage, which would be the GR.3A, would come around. This would go to digital recon pod use and a new helmet with digital features, so kind of more computerized update. And the remaining fleet would go through this. The RAF was going to deploy the Jaguar in 2003 to operate in Iraq during the next Gulf incident, but they were going to operate them from forward bases in Turkey. Well, at the last minute, the Turkish government objected. So without having a base to operate from, the RAF just kind of canned the idea of operating the Jaguar, and there you go. That was pretty much it. Initially, the decision was made in 2004 to retire these at the end of 2007, but then budgetary things, really it was extremely short notice, they decided to retire these in April of 2007, removing the ones that had existed. Now, to be fair, these had already been mostly replaced by newer planes like the Tornado, Harriers in some cases, the newer version like the Harrier 2. So, you know, there weren't a whole lot of Jaguars still flying around out of the order. But, you know, not as glorious a career as, say, the Tornado or the Harrier, but it's definitely a neat plane. And at least unlike the Eurofighter, it wasn't delayed infinitely. Of course, this was a far less ambitious project. It was just, I don't want to say a secondary plane, but it kind of was. They weren't trying to make it a do-everything model. By the way, the advanced trainer that the Jaguar was initially supposed to be in the RAF ended up being the Hawk. The Hawker Hawk. Which is an excellent little trainer, which is not only in service today, but still being manufactured. In fact, they're on to the T.4 version. And it's training pilots for new modern advanced planes like the F-35. As far as these models from Corgi, as you saw, the tail moves. That's about it. Cockpit's fixed, but it does have a pilot inside. You can do gear up or down, typical features, and these are pretty much all die-cast, even the horizontal. Pretty big, chunky, heavy wing. Good stuff. And yeah, the T.4 that you saw earlier. So just about the only successful collaboration between France and the UK, at least when it comes to military fighter jets. There was the Concorde, of course, but lordy, that had its own... I don't know how successful the Concorde really was in reality. Cool plane, but shush, had its issues. But yeah, so we're just kind of diving back in time, and we will continue our little journey. Why not? If you have any questions or just want to talk Jaguars in the comments, please do so. If you could, like, share, and subscribe. This is Misha. I'll catch you very soon. Next time.